you ever noticed that every Iron Maiden song sounds kind of the same? For this video, I went through every single Iron Maiden song. I spent nearly 2 full working days sitting, listening to the songs, and analyzing the tabs. In a few minutes, I'll be telling you the exact number of songs which uses this songwriting technique. So stay tuned. Have you ever noticed that most Iron Maiden songs kind of sound the same? They often have this grand and epic feel to them. It's slightly dark, yet it's triumphant and victorious. It's sometimes mysterious, and oftentimes it's bombastic. And this is all thanks to this one simple chord progression. Oh, and by the way, you don't need to have any music theory knowledge to be able to learn something from this video. People have often derisively called this the Iron Maiden chord progression, and it is obvious to see why, as many of their songs use it at some point. And of course, you know, Iron Maiden is not the only band to use this chord progression over and over. So why do we call it that name? Why not the Dio progression? The answer lies in just how many of the songs use it. So we will get into the actual chords very shortly, but first, just how many Iron Maiden songs use this chord progression? Well, I went back through their songs, checking each one, and here is the result. Out of 160 songs, 89 of them used it. So that means over 56% of the songs use the same chord progression at some point in the song. You can check out my list here. That means fully over half of Iron Maiden songs use this chord progression at some point during the song. And if we isolate just the classic Bruce Dickinson era of Iron Maiden, his first time with the band, that being from Number of the Beast until Fear of the Dark, that is 7 albums and 62 songs. So during this period, Iron Maiden used this progression 46 times. That is 74%. Basically 3/4 of Iron Maiden's classic era was played using the same chord progression. I assume it is from this era that this chord progression started to get its derisive name. And you might say, okay, Varvis, we get it. What is the chord progression? Well, it is these 3 chords. And I'm sure with me just playing those few notes there, you can already sort of hear the Iron Maiden-ness to it, right? That's it. That's the video. I'm only kidding. Let's dive in a little bit deeper here. 160 songs, and 89 of them use this chord progression, including these famous ones. We have Children of the Damned, The Evil That Men Do, and Face in the Sand. When looked at in the minor scale, it is the minor 1, the major 6, and the major 7. These 3 chords together. I'll just quickly explain this here. So when you have a minor scale, they're numbered from 1 to 7, and then the 8th is the repeat. So in A minor, 1 is A, 2 is B, 3 is C, 4 is D, 5 is E, 6 is F, 7 is G, and the chords are simply built upon skipping 1 note each time as you go up. But you could also relate these to their relative major as well. So, you know, relating these in the context of a major scale. So that would be the minor 6, flat 5 to the flat 4. But since every Iron Maiden song is basically in a minor key, we refer to it as the minor 1, major 6, major 7 chord progression. Now, if you are unfamiliar with this naming system for chords, I would recommend watching this video here. But for now, you don't really need to know any of that stuff to understand how to use this here. Now, why do most Iron Maiden songs sound very similar is not only because of their use of this chord progression, but also due to the root note they choose to use. Almost every one of their songs is based on one of the 2 lowest strings on a guitar or bass in standard tuning. So that would be an E or an A. So most of the time, most Iron Maiden songs are either played in E minor or in A minor. So when you combine these 2 common root notes with the common chord progressions, that is why some of these songs sound so familiar and samey, I guess you could say. So yeah, this chord progression works pretty well on guitar and bass really too, right? Because it's sort of, the octave is right here on the 7th fret. So right, we have the open E right out, so then we have the 1, the 6, 7 of E minor. And they also use A minor often, right? So open A, 1, 6, 7. This is all sort of in the Iron Maiden playbook. They really like to use those chord progressions specifically, especially on those strings, you know, that's one right there, and you know, like that's just the Iron Maiden sound to me, you know. Those power chords right there, essentially. It's very, very cool. So this chord progression feels very epic and grandiose. It just fits Iron Maiden very well, their lyrical themes. It resolves itself very nicely, yet it isn't as cliche as some of the more common musical resolutions we have heard over the years. Due to having the minor chord be the root chord, it doesn't sound too happy, yet the two major chords which follow it don't allow it to be too melancholic. And of course, depending on the melodies that surround this progression, you can make it sound and feel very different ways. Like, despite these two songs using the same progression, these parts feel very, very different. This progression works on a few different levels. Firstly, starting on the minor chord, then shifting to the major 6 gives some emotional uplift to the song. It adds some major tonality which contrasts nicely with the minor tonic, sort of a yin and yang, Jekyll and Hyde sort of deal here. Then as they shift up one whole step to the 7 chord, it gives this feeling of a grand movement, especially when it is resolved by moving another whole step back up to the tonic. The 7 chord in a minor scale sometimes acts as a substitute dominant, which basically simply means that the urge to resolve back to the root is very, very strong, which creates a very satisfying resolution. Chords in these progressions, especially when the 1 chord is the highest chord, are all spaced a whole step apart, and as you progress through these whole step movements, it gives a very dynamic feel to it. The chord progression almost has its own momentum, so when you combine that with the emotional pull as well as the driving rhythm that Iron Maiden is famous for, it really is no wonder why this progression sounds so good in their music. It's just happy enough, and it's just dark enough, it's just epic enough. It's just a really, really good and satisfying and pleasing chord progression. Now, of course, Iron Maiden plays mostly power chords, which omits the thirds of these chords. Yet the emotional weight that they hold is still there. You don't really need the thirds to feel the weight. And these thirds are actually played often in the vocal melodies or the leads which accompany these progressions. But let's just go back to the song list here briefly. 56% of their songs use this progression, but even more of their songs use these 3 chords, but they add in another chord. So sometimes they might add in a 5 chord, or often, especially in the later time, they will use the 3 chord. So if you look at it, these 3 chords plus another one probably make up almost 75% of all Iron Maiden songs. And to be fair though, I did include songs that went from the 1 to the 7 to the 6, then to the 7 again as part of that counting number. So anyways, classic Bruce era Iron Maiden uses progression at some point in the song 75% of the time, a full 3/4 of their songs. However, interestingly, the Paul Di'Anno era albums use it the least, which makes sense to me as a lot of these not only have a very different sound due to the singer, but a lot of them simply feel very different for what I consider to be the classic Iron Maiden song. Interestingly, once Bruce returned to the band the second time, they seem to return to leaning on this chord progression again, as both Brave New World and Dance of Death use it on almost all the songs. Although as they get to the later Iron Maiden albums, they start using it less and less, although it is mostly due to the fact that they go to the 1, the 6, the 7, and then usually to the 3. You know, now I'm making this sound a whole lot worse than it actually is. These songs are not the same chord progression played the exact same way every single time. One of the things that I noticed while I was analyzing these songs, going through the tabs, is that Iron Maiden often plays with the harmonic rhythm of the progression often. Harmonic rhythm is essentially just the rate at which chords change or progress through a song, and for the most part, Iron Maiden almost always changes this up. Oftentimes they'll dwell on the 1 chord for several measures before quickly moving to the 6 and then to the 7. Other times they spend an equal amount of time on each. They almost always change this up, and it's very interesting to go back and look and see how they change this up every single time and how they use dwelling on these chords in musical ways to help progress the song, essentially. In addition to switching up the harmonic rhythm, Iron Maiden will do cool things with this progression as well. Sometimes the chord progression won't be found anywhere in the song, and then bam, just simply in the solo section. Sometimes they use this simply as a transition progression between two separate parts, so it only appears in just this one small piece that progresses it to the next part of the song, from a verse to a chorus, so to speak. And sometimes the progression is used throughout the song, and other times just in one small section. I just find it very, very fascinating that a chord progression can become so closely identified with a musical group. This progression, combined with harmonized leads and thirds, with Steve Harris's galloping bass lines underneath it, really forms the core foundation of what I consider to be the classic Iron Maiden song. What other bands use this progression? Leave it down in the comments below.